Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Welcome to next session here of the Thought Series, Future Stories. We are not alone, and we're gonna explore this topic today with a really excellent panel of founders of tech companies, startups, and funds across Michigan. We're gonna have some perspective from other communities as well as Grand Rapids itself. And the point of this session is to talk about compelling stories in this space and what we can learn from people who have been doing this for years as Grand Rapids and West Michigan, really sets out on charting this new course centered around the technology industry. And so behind me you have names and titles and background of each of the panelists, but I was hoping we could start by each of you sharing your compelling story. And from there, we'll sort of explore this topic of what it means for Grand Rapids to sort of position itself as a tech hub, where this has worked elsewhere in the country, as well as some potential pitfalls as we sort of set out on this journey. So I guess we can, go down the line here. Carl, you want to get us started? Founder of Atomic Object here in Grand Rapids?
Sure. I don't think I need that, right? You all hear me from this? Yeah. Okay, great. So I was thinking about, I don't know if this story is compelling at all, but it is, having spent now sort of 23 years in the tech ecosystem in Grand Rapids, to reflect back on what the year 2000 was like and how I was a tenured and promoted and pretty happy professor at Grand Valley State teaching computer science, which at the time was a great job and a safe job, tenured and all that good stuff. And I jumped out to to help create the tech side, the engineering side of a startup that was coming out of that .com era. And that was the year 2000. And by the year 2001, that company had flamed out, and I was either going to go back with my tail between my legs to the university and tell the dean, like, that decision I made in March was really dumb, I am coming back after all, or I was going to figure it out. And I had a few resources. I had 3 interns, one of whom, Mike Marsiglia, is now one of our co-CEOs, and the remainder of Elise in Easttown. And when I think about what the tech ecosystem back then was, like, startups weren't a thing, really. It was very uncommon in Grand Rapids. There weren't the support organizations we have now. There were very few software companies at all. Very, very different, and it's just fun to reflect on how much that has changed in these years. So if you fast forward from starting Atomic out of the ashes of that .com startup to today, we're 95-ish or 100 people. I'm not even sure what the exact count is anymore since I retired in January. We've transitioned out of that founders era very successfully with Mike and Sean running the company. We have offices in 4 cities now, and a lot's changed in that time. The other thing that I think makes me relevant to sit here is doing a lot of angel investing and being involved with Michigan Capital Network, specifically Grand Angels locally, and then the Michigan Capital Network more broadly for many, many years.
Excellent. Rachel?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rachel Gray, and I'm the Executive Director of Hello West Michigan. Our organization helps people who are interested in relocating here, and we also work with companies to support and enhance their talent acquisition efforts. So what does that mean? We're really all about growing West Michigan. And what's really unique about our organization is that we were the first organization of our kind in the country. So we are employer-led and an organization that is totally dedicated to talent attraction and retention, really focusing on intern and entry level up through professionals. So 10 years ago when I started this as program manager with Hello West Michigan, there are no other organizations like us, right? Like when you're the first, you're really out there alone. And so, similar to, like, there's no one to watch, there's no one to benchmark against, there's really no support necessarily in the region, or even when you look around the country, like, everything you are coming up with starts as a completely white canvas. And, as a small, nimble organization, that's a really interesting and fun place to be, where it's a 2-person team. When I started, I was the lower of those 2 people. And really, my executive director and now my mentor, she had a really big job because I started with Hello West Michigan right out of college. So she was not only training me for the job, but really like training me how to be a young professional. And I've been so blessed to be able to work at, in this job that I love and help grow Hello West Michigan. To now, we are one of many around the country. As talent has become such an issue, now there are tons of organizations like ours. There's probably 30 to 50 around the country. So places that are promoting their city, their municipality, their region, their state, or promoting an area on behalf of employers. And so it's really interesting to sort of, be the lead, but then now that there's so many others in that space, to also always having to constantly push forward and make sure that, okay, we were the first, but how do we still remain on the cutting edge? Because the talent issue is not going away, right? It's only becoming even more prevalent, more hyper-focused, right? Everyone knows what talent means now. And so that's a little bit of how Hello West Michigan got started and how I find myself here.
Prem?
Morning, everyone. Prem Bodagala, Director at Red Cedar Ventures and Michigan Rise. My story is a little bit similar to Rachel's and Carl's in that I came here for school to West Michigan, and I was interning at a firm downtown Grand Rapids called Charter Capital Partners during 2008. So, crisis. I was fortunate that I was brought on as a junior member of a first-time fund called the Michigan Accelerator Fund 1 by John Kirshen and Dale Grogan. Dale actually works with Michigan Capital Network, and that's a small community. But they took a chance on a young kid, immigrant. I came here on my 16th birthday. And kind of showed me the ropes and mentored me. And then as a junior member, similar to you, kind of really drunk from the fire hose on setting up a fund and working with startups, etc. And over the next 10 years, I had the privilege of working with many West Michigan as well as other companies across Michigan. Have invested altogether in over 200 companies to date. But really just wanted to kind of harken back to I think in West Michigan there's that support system. It's a small community, so there's a lot more that can be accomplished here than versus like maybe if you were in a New York or a California where you could kind of get lost and it's difficult to get access to mentors and networks, etc.
Trista?
Hi everyone, I'm Trista Van Tine. I'm the co-founder and executive director of Michigan Founders Fund. So Michigan Founders Fund is a nonprofit organization that focuses on supporting high-growth entrepreneurs in growing and scaling their companies. What we lean into is founder fellowship. So our theory of change for the state is that high-growth entrepreneurship is truly the key to the future economic prosperity of Michigan. And the more that we can nurture that kind of talent and the founder mentality and the founder culture here, the more we can see economic success, which can translate into community success. So what we do is use, we weren't the first. We did have the fortune of getting to benchmark across the country other organizations like ours that use what we call a 1% pledge model. You might have heard of this or seen this in other places where founders, entrepreneurs can pledge 1% of their equity, their personal equity or their company equity into a fund that can be used for a variety of things. So we've used that, and it's truly been really impactful in bringing founders together and galvanizing the network of entrepreneurs around the shared vision and mission for making Michigan a place that can truly attract more innovation and be a center for innovation. So our members are entrepreneurs and venture capitalists who have made that pledge, who have said, I'm going to give 1% of my future success into a collective fund. That's why we're a Founders Fund. That will be used for placemaking and grant making and enriching the quality of lives of the communities here in Michigan. So I'm really lucky to get to do that work. My story is I grew up in Michigan in a very small town in Genesee County that even people from Michigan have never heard of. They say that they have, and then they haven't. And I went to U of M for undergrad and then left for a long time. So I'm a Michigander. I came back in 2020 during the pandemic. And the reason I stayed, because I was actually exploring other jobs in different parts of the country, in New York. And the reason I stayed, well, one, I wanted to be with family, all my immediate family's here, but two, I started, investigating what was happening in the tech ecosystem, in the startup ecosystem across the state, and was just so impressed by the different, the level of activity, and then the diversity in terms of the kinds of industries that entrepreneurs were looking to disrupt. So, even in our member network, we have over 15 different verticals of industry being tackled right now. So that really excited me and encouraged me to want to stay and build the next phase of my career here. And, getting to see, but what are some of our challenges still? And the challenge was, we don't have a center of density and a true center of gravity for these kinds of founders. So that's what Michigan Founders Fund is really here to do, is to help connect everyone together and really serve as that, center of gravity for this sector of the economy.
Excellent. Thanks to all of you. So I think, maybe a good start here would be to sort of set a baseline of where Michigan, or even West Michigan, is at in the venture capital and the startup space. Carl, can you talk a little about sort of the maybe 10-year trajectory that Michigan has been on as it relates to venture capital and growing startups here?
Well, it's certainly been up and to the right. West Michigan especially had, I don't think, any local venture capital in the year 2000 or before that. And there was a lot of money, but it wasn't being invested locally, and there wasn't a very vibrant startup scene. And that's changed dramatically and for the better. And I'm assuming that's also that the state of Michigan has tracked that same path. But back in 2000, people talked about Ann Arbor as the place for startup and venture capital. I think it probably is still the place. Would you agree?
It does have in terms of numbers, it has the highest concentration of high growth companies.
Southeast Michigan, probably.
Yeah, Southeast Michigan generally. But West Michigan has gotten a lot better than it used to be.
Prem, what's been your experience, over the years since, you were a junior back at Charter Capital?
Absolutely. So to Carl's point, I think venture capital is concentrated in pockets across the state, right? And also companies that were trying to raise venture capital are mostly raising it from local venture funds. And I think what we've seen, right now is for companies in the growth stages, now we're seeing venture capital from the coast come to the state, right? So companies that are at that stage, no problem in attracting capital, whether it's locally or across the country. It's at that earlier stages, right, the pre-seed and the seed stages, where it's still a challenge for companies to raise money. Downstream investors are, they're looking for more milestones. I think investing has kind of gone, risk-taking has gone further downstream, right? So that's where I think it's kind of evolved, and the state has kind of recognized that, and has, the MEDC has, several programs, one of which is what we run through Michigan Rise. It is a pre-seed fund for the state of Michigan. And we've invested over the past 3 years in 62 companies across the state, but it's still not enough, right? In 3 years we did 62 companies, but there's a lot more out there, right? So more resources are needed at the earliest stages, especially coming out of university, where it's still not clear if there's a product market fit, so that needs to be kind of nurtured still. So to answer your question, capital has kind of further moved downstream, but once companies kind of hit their stride in growth stages, then capital, it's not an issue. It comes from across the country or even locally venture funds.
Trista, what's your impression of how Michigan compares to maybe other states or other cities, and how it's growing companies?
Well, Prem said, one of the biggest gaps that we still have to solve here to make this a a great environment for entrepreneurs is that first check-in and that early capital. You know, the founders here struggle. It takes them 2 to 3 years longer to get pre-seed funding than it does for entrepreneurs doing the same things in other parts of the country and on the coast. So I think one thing that, you know, we look at a lot is like, how can we help create a new cultural narrative in Michigan that helps people understand the benefits of taking these kinds of risks, that welcomes it, and that we can also create an environment here that, you know, there are places for entrepreneurs to go if something does fail. Like, it's okay, go try and fail. We know a lot of you might fail, but you'll, you know, have a fallback, a safety net, and you can try again. You know, so for us, the way we focus on that is creating this network of founders for founders, really investing in one another's success, exchanging resources, exchanging networks, and helping each other achieve those next milestones. Because that's something that we could do immediately, right? Like, get the founders together. I do still think, though, we've got a lot of work to do, and we have to do it collectively across the universities, government, nonprofits like ours, to help change that perspective of these kinds of business models in the state, to make it fertile ground for innovation, to be a place that is excited by risk-taking, and to really think about it from a founder's perspective, a founder-first perspective.
And, you know, I guess just to add onto that a little bit, you know, how much should Michigan or West Michigan, you know, sort of be emulating the success that's taken place on the coast, or, you know, thinking about areas like the Bay Area? Or how much should we, you know, be avoiding that or taking a new approach to growing companies? Carl, any thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on that.
Okay. All right.
I think we've spent 3 decades chasing after one city or another, trying to be Silicon Valley or Austin or wherever it might be, Seattle, I suppose. And I don't think that is a good thing for Grand Rapids. I think we should be thinking about what we have as resources, what's unique to our city, what we can emphasize and build on, rather than trying to become something else. So I'm sort of a skeptic when it comes to Tech Hub, if it's interpreted as let's be Austin. I'm very skeptical about that. I don't think we could do it, frankly, and I don't think we should do it. When we say we want to be a tech hub like Austin, does that mean we want all of the traffic problems they have, and the income inequality problems they have, and the housing problems they have, and probably the pollution problems? I don't know for sure. Like, I don't think so. So I think we need to also think about how do we do it in a way that respects and brings up the people who have lived here for generations and who have not participated in those kinds of jobs. So the talk before this one, there's a lot of talk about 49507 zip code, where the places where all the black people were forced to live in the red line districts in the, most of the 20th century. And the kids growing up there in that zip code, if we can't figure out a way for them to participate in our tech hub, I think we are failing. Not only from a justice standpoint, but also just from, like, use economic resources well. We got a lot of people that are just not able to participate. So frankly, I'm much more interested in that than I am in, you know, the sort of the glory of being like a little tiny baby Austin.
Right. Right. Rachel, how do you sort of approach that in your work in terms of, you know, Michigan maybe competing for these jobs with places like Austin or the coasts? You know, how are you approaching this, or you know, differentiating West Michigan from those areas?
Yeah, you know, I do think one thing that West Michigan and Michigan have done well for a long time is understand what our assets are. Right, you know, just when you think about talent attraction, we have always, in Michigan, we've been really good at tourism, right? Like, we've been good at that for a long, long time. But a lot of the assets that the lifestyle assets that you promote for tourism are actually very similar for lifestyle and for living here. And so I think that's one thing that Michigan has actually done really well is understanding what assets we have and promoting that, right? Not trying to be something that we're not, but really promoting what we have, and then making sure that the people that we're recruiting here that they understand that, right? They're not coming here thinking, okay, this is another Austin or this is another, you know, West Coast, but understanding with eyes wide open, like, hey, we have winter here. And if you like winter and you like Four Seasons, like this is the place for you and you should definitely come here. But not trying to hide that fact, right? Like we have to be authentic to who we are as a community, the issues that we have in our community, and find the people who not only want to embrace it, but also want to be a part of that solution. And so I think in terms of talent attraction, it's being very authentic to that, right? Not selling something that we're not, but being very real about what we are and why that's great and how much farther we have to go.
Speaking off of that a little bit, so we have invested in portfolio companies in northern Michigan, in the Traverse City area, Fulton, et cetera. And especially during COVID, I think what's happened is folks like from other parts of the country, they are attracted to the natural beauty, and so they have bought like this, you know, vacation homes or, you know, Airbnb type of properties, which has created kind of like a capacity issue for people who are living there and maybe want to move there, right? So that's kind of increased the cost of living if you want to buy a house, et cetera, in places like that. So I think finding that balance, how do you make the place that you're trying to bring folks to bring companies to, more affordable and hospitable versus, you know, maintain that balance. Maybe it's a policy thing, right, locally, but if it becomes, you know, out of, you know, budget, then it's really difficult to kind of attract but also retain that population.
Mm-hmm.
Public transportation. We need more public transportation.
You didn't take the train over?
Trista, I wanted to get back to a topic that you had brought up, and that's, you know, the founder's perspective. And, you know, I'm just wondering, you know, as we were preparing for this panel, you know, you talked about all of the, you know, small businesses across Michigan and startups and entrepreneurs that are generating, you know, billions of dollars in investments that are largely going under the radar. Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing, you know, among these entrepreneurs and these companies, and maybe why, you know, they're not sort of generating the type of attention or coverage that, you know, maybe some of the larger firms often do?
Yeah, well, I'll start with Grand Rapids. Just right, you know, in this neighborhood, we have 4 startup companies: Clara, Let's Trista, Wedge HR, and Holo, that have raised, between the 4 of them, just under $15 million. And these are all very early stage companies, right? That's tremendous. And I would imagine a lot of people here haven't heard of some of these companies, or most of them even. And I think that's part of that problem, that like cultural narrative we need to shift, right? So, and they're doing things in workforce and HR software, you know, new footwear, and financial software. And when we look across the state, so over the last 10 years, there have been about 14 different high growth companies that have started here and have grown and scaled and have raised over billions of dollars. And some of those companies include another Grand Rapids native, Bloomscape. Justin Mass started Bloomscape, which, you know, direct to consumer plants on an online marketplace. Census, cybersecurity, I'll just name some of the companies I'm talking about. The other companies in that list, like now my mind's going blank, but you know, there's a lot of fintech, consumer product companies, cybersecurity companies, some energy companies in that list that are doing all of this work and creating jobs here and like spurring, you know, the economy, but we don't hear about those stories. And I think that part of it is to the point of like we know what our legacy is and what we do well, and we lean into that pretty hard here in Michigan. Another reason for that could be that you know, it's those founders aren't doing a lot to self-promote because they're all just heads down like creating business value, and they don't, you know, have time to do that because for a lot of them they see more value in promoting what they're doing outside of our state because that's where they're having an easier time raising capital. So I don't know what the solution is, frankly, Andy, but yeah, I would love to see more of our media outlets that are based locally here in Michigan have dedicated coverage to tech entrepreneurship, to you know, the startup economy.
Anyone else want to add to that?
Curious if you knew those company names, Andy, since you're in that business.
I knew a couple of them. But I'll be a little selfish here, and what can we as the media be doing better to elevate these companies, these homegrown companies?
I can maybe give an example. So at a portfolio company, we recently led a seed round in. It's a MSU spin-out called Inspired Solutions. So they're doing really important work in PFAS chemical destruction. PFAS are the forever chemicals. Recently we're hearing more about them in the media. So they had been doing this important work for a while, and so we recognized the value. We had been working with them. We were the first investors, from Red Cedar Ventures, which is an MSU-focused fund. But then Crain did an article, speaking of media help, right? So on them, and then that kind of timing was good because then PFAS was being discussed more nationally, and then that kind of generated a lot of inbound interest, and one of that kind of went on to being a co-lead with us in that prize round. So I think when the media does kind of show some focus and attention, that can be a force for good in exposure. Right? A lot of important work is being done at our universities. We have some of the best universities in the country, but it's like maybe locally and it doesn't have as much exposure, across the state or even nationally. So I just want to give an example of that, the positive effects when media kind of does and this was kind of a series of articles on companies within the East Lansing area. To Trista's point, we have some of, like, there's a company in Lansing, one of 4 companies in the country that is producing isotopes, radioisotopes. Probably very few people in this room know about that. It's a very crucial commodity for national security. Most of it usually comes from China and Russia. But when the article came out, it kind of increased people's awareness about that.
I hear a lot from startup founders that they just simply don't know what the venture capital community is in Michigan. And they don't know who to go to, they don't know who the players are, they don't know what's available, or how to crack into that. So I think it's something that Crain's could do a great job at, of just bringing some attention to who the players are on a regular basis. It's great to have these one-off stories. I have participated in several interviews for those sorts of things, and it's awesome to get companies you care about some visibility. But focusing on the funders, I think, would be really excellent.
How about from the state level? The state has resources to put behind this industry as well, and I'm curious, if you see, any change on that front in recent years, or maybe is that developing more, sort of putting state resources behind growing sort of the startup space.
Prem, you're best.
Yeah,
one, right?
happy to take that. So the state, I think, since honestly, at least I began my career in 2010, so I'm going to start from there. So they've had various iterations of the pre-seed fund. So Michigan Rise is the 3rd iteration of the pre-seed fund. We manage that on behalf of the state. So they have consistently supported that program, right? So to be that first source of capital for startups in the state, and they work strongly with the universities as well to kind of spring technologies out of the university into companies. But like I said earlier, I think more can be done, right? Both from the state, but also I think from companies, from all stakeholders to kind of encourage companies at that earliest stages. And we at Red Cedar Ventures and Michigan Rise, so we are the investment arm of MSU Research Foundation. So the university and the foundation is doing its part to kind of springing technologies out of the university, and then the state supports in the form of Michigan Rise. But of course, a lot more can be done so that we can have more of such stories, across the state. but the state has been, in the form of MEDC, one of the strongest supporters of and recognizing the importance of innovation and providing resources.
Excellent. So before we go on and cover some more solutions and the outlook of this space in Michigan, I think we should sort of acknowledge a problem that's going on in this space, and that's diversity in the venture capital space, or the lack thereof. And I'm wondering, if the panel can sort of give the audience sort of an idea of what the landscape is like for entrepreneurs of color or women-owned companies in attracting capital, how or whether that's been improving, and how the state can do a better job at that. We have panelists here with companies who have been are really outliers in this space, and really bolstering diversity among venture capital investing. But I'm wondering if we could lay the groundwork of where Michigan is at, and then what we can be doing better in this space.
Trista gave me hope on this subject. You should talk about your stats.
Yeah, so I think that the way our state operates in terms of supporting high growth entrepreneurship very much parallels the national statistics, right? We've seen some promising movement in the right direction in terms of Ann Arbor in the last couple of years was ranked. There was a study showing that Ann Arbor was one of the top tech hubs for female-founded companies raising their early capital. We have seen Black founders, an increase in funding going to Black founders in Southeast Michigan, but it's incremental gains, right? So what we have tried to do is, and the thing that I think all of us can do, and as a starting point, is just be very intentional about making an effort to include historically disenfranchised groups from entrepreneurship and from venture capital. And that's our responsibility, actually, because for a lot of them, and I've heard this directly from underrepresented founders that are part of MFF, is they wouldn't necessarily have come to us or wouldn't have thought to do like cold outreach to like Prem, or even reach out to other founders and say, hey, can you share your story with me? Because they just weren't raised in that kind of environment, and they didn't see themselves in that space and think that that was something that they should be doing or could be doing. So we need to be the ones to say, yes, we want you to do those things, and we'll help you, and we'll create support systems around you to do that, and to help you succeed. And that's what we try to do at MFF in terms of being very intentional about that, making sure that all of our events are reflective of the demographics of the area that we're in, making sure that we show that visually too. So again, people can see themselves and see like, okay, this is a space that I want to be a part of. But I think it really just boils down to one thing we can all do, starts with intentionality.
I love that word. And I, riffing off of that, when we set up like Michigan Rise, and I'm going to share that data because it's top of mind, I just did a report on this. So, we, like I said, we did 62 companies, but from the outset we were very intentional about diversity. And so we look at diversity from various aspects. Geographic diversity, we discussed about capital not being equally available across the state. So places like Midland, Michigan, or Houghton, they're underserved, right? But we also look at other things like BIPOC founders or women founders. So of the 62 companies, 40% are founded by BIPOC founders, and about 30% by women founders, right? Definitely better than compared to statistics across the state, but I think we could be doing more, right? We only have 62 companies. There's a lot more companies out there. And the point that Trista made is, how can founders see themselves as approaching, institutions or funds for support? The way we looked at it, maybe as a solution, is create an internship program for an accelerator that we run called the CADE internship. It's actually done with the help of City of Grand Rapids as well. So we're bring on interns from backgrounds of color, so they can work and observe, venture professionals, and kind of maybe find a path for them with either venture funds or startup companies. So investing, but also kind of encouraging talent, I think, so that they can grow on to become a venture professional or a startup founder.
And we run an internship program actually as well through Michigan Founders Fund, a diversity, equity, and inclusion belonging-focused program to help underrepresented college students find pathways into startups. So they get paid experience, and then hopefully that leads them, empowers them to feel like they can pursue a career in that space. So we work with startups from all over the state who offer these opportunities to college students, and we also pair them with individual mentors. Just like we do with founders, you have to create a long-term support around them. So we group the interns into cohorts so that they can be, a support system for themselves too. And we provide ongoing workshops and kind of professional development in parallel to the experiences they're getting directly in the startups. Because one thing we do know is that, education is definitely a powerful tool for creating generational wealth and for socioeconomic mobility and finding places, in venture and in startups. Quickly though, I'll mention something too when we're talking about diversity, what Carl said earlier, we don't want to be the next Austin, we want to be our own Michigan, right? I couldn't agree more, and I think a lot of that has to do too with this issue of inclusion and belonging and diversity, where what we've seen happen in places like Silicon Valley and in Austin, when they became these booming tech hubs, they ended up displacing the local communities, right? So we need to do better. We haven't hit that apex of growth in Michigan yet, so we can bring community along in the process and add community voice into how we're growing and building and becoming a tech hub, and make sure that our ecosystem is actually reflective of the state of Michigan.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the national stats on this are pretty dismal. Black founders get less than 2% of the venture capital money that's invested every year. Less than 2%. Unless you're a black woman, and then it's less than 1%. So not good. And obviously out of alignment with population and probably a whole host of, there's something clearly going on about that. I just recently became aware of something, a fund in Chicago called the Fifth Star Fund. Evidently Chicago's city flag has 4 stars on it. I don't know what those 4 stars mean, but Fifth Star is a play on that. Fifth Star Fund is a venture philanthropy fund. It's a very interesting thing I hadn't heard of before. And they are looking at providing, they did a study on this terrible stat I just gave. And what they found out was that the bottleneck wasn't in the A, B, and C rounds, the growth stage rounds that come way down the road from what we're talking about. It's actually in the, it's not even in pre-seed, it's in the friends and family stage. That's always the first place you go as an entrepreneur to get some money to pursue your idea, friends and family. So the average friends and family round is $23,000. That's what a founder gets from a friends and family round to start her business. It turns out that the investable net worth of the average black family in the United States is way less than $23,000. So guess what a black founder doesn't have access to? Friends and family round. So they're not even getting to the stage where they can compete for pre-seed or seed or A, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If they do well in those A, B, and C stages, which is very, very interesting. So this is all stuff I'm talking about from the study that Fifth Star did. It's the first time I had seen anyone look at this problem really intentionally and figure out where is the bottleneck. So they started a fund which is supported by donations. So the investors are making a charitable contribution into the fund, and then the Fifth Star Fund folks are sourcing and vetting and doing friends and family $25,000 rounds into black-led startups. Been doing it for a couple of years, and they have some impressive statistics of success thus far, although not that many, but impressive results from the cohorts, as gauged by do their companies go on to further funding rounds, matriculate into the further funding rounds. So I'm kind of excited about that, and that's a model that, you know, should be able to be viable anywhere.
Excellent. And Rachel, on this topic, you know, certainly West Michigan has a perception about it. How can West Michigan make founders who maybe aren't from here or want to relocate here feel welcome?
That's a great question. It's, you know, this issue is not just, it's not just founders, right? It's any newcomer. And it's not that we don't want new people here. Let's be very clear about that. West Michigan is actually a very welcoming place. We talk about that a lot on our call, right? The really the welcoming history of West Michigan, especially Grand Rapids. You think about the waves of immigrants that we've had here, not just in kind of like the traditional like history book sense of, you know, the late 1800s, early 1900s, but really into the latter 20th century, right? Like we've had several different rounds of kind of recent refugees and immigrants that have come here to West Michigan. And in West Michigan, though, we have a lot of people who are born, raised, and rooted. People stay here because they like it, and that's fantastic. But what that means is those people who are born, raised, and rooted, they've never had that experience of relocation. And what's really unique about that experience is it's kind of like the first day of kindergarten or the first day of college, which is when you go into the lunchroom, you never want to be the last kid standing. So you kind of like grab on to like the person that's almost right next to you, because you like they're there, you're there, like you're gonna pair up together. And that's because as humans we don't like to be alone. And you think to your maybe your kindergarten friends or your college friends, if you think about them now, think like everyone here, would you be friends with them today if you met them now? Maybe not, right? Like you're grabbing onto that person because they're the one standing next to you. And if you've never had that experience, it's actually very similar to relocation. When you relocate, you're looking for anybody. Like you're looking for any lifeline, someone to be a friend with. Well, if everyone in the room is born, raised, and rooted here, they're set. They don't need friends, right? They're not the first day of kindergarten or the first day of college. Like their friend group is set, which means they're not open to that energy that new relocatee is putting off. And so that's one of the things that makes it really hard to make friends here. And again, it's not because people here are not welcoming. They're actually incredibly welcoming. This is not just a West Michigan thing. I've heard it labeled many other places. West Michigan nice. There's actually a lot of places that call it that. Right? We're very welcoming, but then we don't actually take it to the next step. We don't invite you into our homes out for beers on Friday. We don't do that, but that's because if we're born, raised, and rooted, we probably already have people that we want to do that with. If we don't have room in our, I call it our network onion. We don't have room in our layers of our onion for new people. And so that makes it really hard to welcome new people into the community. In fact, a lot of times the new people, they get together with other new people. Other people who are here on their first day of kindergarten or their first day of college, because all those people are having the same feelings. But what that means is those roots for those new transplants, they're just not as deep. And so when the next opportunity comes along, the next opportunity, you know, if you're a founder, if the next opportunity for funding or investment, or even, you know, if you're not a funder, you're an employee that got recruited here, if you don't have those deep roots here, those deep connections, it's really easy to pick up and move to the next place. And so that becomes really, really critical, and it's not just the media's job or the startup community or capital, you know, venture capital community to welcome founders. It becomes all of us, right? Like it becomes the whole community. It's all of our jobs to welcome people here to West Michigan and to help keep them here and make it sticky and make them stay.
So when I was living in Grand Rapids, it was like my weekend activity to kind of seek out these hole-in-the-wall places, right? So I think Grand Rapids has the largest Bosnian community outside of Boston, right? Like recently, there's a big Nepali community, you know, on the south side of town. But when I was here downtown, you'd have like a Greek festival or Polish festival, but you know, like there wasn't like a Nepali festival or a Bosnian festival. So I guess if there's a way, a forum to kind of bring these maybe lesser known cultures, it's a bi-directional thing. It's not just like, you know, rooted communities reaching out, but also the communities that are new kind of reaching out to the existing communities. If there was a way to kind of make that interaction happen, maybe they can find more avenues into getting more integrated into the team.
Prem, if you have any restaurant tips, let us know.
Let's chat.
Yeah, all right. The next question I'm excited to explore with the panel as well. So, you know, we're talking about this sort of 10-year tech push that recently sort of launched Grand Rapids in West Michigan, and that's great, that's exciting. But is there also a sense of, just by example of other cities in the United States, to be careful what you ask for, and the implications that come with attempting to draw a large number of companies or people to a region? What risks come along with that? And I guess we can go down the panel here. We can bounce questions off each other. But I guess we can start there. And Trista, if you want to get us started, what's the risk of a dedicated sort of decade-long push around this industry here?
Well, I mean, I think it starts with, how are we defining tech, first of all, because it's pretty broad and all-encompassing. And is it really about tech, or is it about a push for innovation? And I think if it's a push for innovation, then that changes the nature of what we're doing, and it changes the game. Well, it changes it completely, because then it's about attracting diverse talent, people who aren't rooted here, diverse ideas, people who want to do things across a lot of different industries or build a lot of different kinds of products. So that's why I always cringe when I see more state campaigns just focused on positioning Michigan as this one product economy around our automotive roots, because the reality is innovation is so far beyond just the automotive space, and it has to be about diversification more than anything. So I know you're wanting the risk, but I think if we talk about positioning ourselves as an innovation economy and doing that kind of a push, then there's only going to be benefits, right? We're going to see an increase in population, which Michigan has trended in the other direction for years on that front. We're going to see new kinds of ideas, new small businesses popping up, new arts and culture, because where small businesses come, then the community flourishes, and then more coffee shops and other kind of businesses are created to create a quality of life. So I think that's a positive thing. I think what you're asking is, if we center our efforts on, trying to grow too fast, I think that's where the problem happened in Silicon Valley and Austin. It's not just about the fact that they want to be a tech hub, it's about the fact that they wanted to do things, break things. What was the motto? Go fast and break things. We don't want to break things. We want to do it at the right speed. So by having so much of that growth so quickly, again, that goes back to they ended up displacing communities. It made the cost of living skyrocket. And that's where we need to be careful as we're growing the economy and trying to position ourselves in the innovation space to do things at the right pace and make sure that it's a very diversified offer that we're putting out there.
Sure, and maybe I should clarify a little bit. So I guess affordability is one feature to Michigan compared to some of these other cities. And maybe there's some uniqueness to Michigan from these other cities, is that at risk? And I think you addressed some of that, Trista, but any other panelists, want to kind of look at this question?
We saw, I think, coastal capital coming to Michigan and the larger Midwest because of our affordability, yes. Right? Money goes farther here, the valuations are, not as crazy as maybe on the coast, right? So, but I think if we lose that, right, and we become like an Austin or like one of the cities on the coast, then we would maybe be more challenged to attract that capital from the coast. So I think that has to be something that the policymakers have to ensure. So what does affordability mean? Cost of living, housing, etc., transportation, so that places here are still good to kind of live, work, and play, right? So they can bring the talent, retain the talent, that are so crucial for the tech economy. And also I think that you had a good point on the definition of tech. Even within tech, there is this debate about like, what is real tech? You know, is it software or is it, there's like this sometimes, looking down the nose towards CPG. But innovation in CPG is also innovation, right? So I think sometimes, there's discussions at policy level as well. We should, provide more resources to real tech. But, Amazon, they were selling books, when it began, and see where they are today, right? So I think, being welcoming and receptive to innovation of all kinds, I think is important.
I ranted earlier about all the things we don't want out of being a tech hub, so I won't do that, but I think that it's part of being true to who we are is remembering the huge advantages that West Michigan and Grand Rapids have had over decades, if not 100 years, of having a lot of private, family-owned businesses. And so, venture capital isn't necessarily compatible with that in the sense that a venture capital-backed startup is lighting a fuse of 5 to 7 years in length to have some sort of an exit. And if that exit takes that company out of Grand Rapids, then you lose a lot. You really didn't gain a steady employer and a steady company who's embedded in the community, lives in the community, cares about the community, and invests in the community. So figuring out how to help the companies we have here now and have had for years be more tech savvy and bring tech into their products and services to be more competitive worldwide strikes me as a better economic development policy. It's less dramatic, less splashy, but I think it might be more effective.
Yeah. Rachel, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's definitely important that we grow our own, right? Like that's critically important. And I think whenever you're thinking about any sort of strategy, right, it's a balance between attracting people from outside and growing your own. And I think places that do it well, there's that balance, and there really is that focus of growing it at home. And to put it in perspective in terms of affordability here, I was looking at these numbers yesterday. So the national cost of living average, when you average out and basically say the national average is 100, Grand Rapids is actually sitting at 96, so below that national average. When you expand that to our MSA, which is several counties, it goes down actually to 94. And when you look at our entire kind of West Michigan region, so what we consider Region 4, so I mean a lot of those places are within an hour commute of Grand Rapids, it actually goes down to 90. So incredibly affordable place to live because although prices have gone up here, prices have gone up everywhere. And so that's a really big piece of that affordability, and we still measure up really, really well.
Excellent. Well, before sort of open it up to the audience, any other closing thoughts or topics, aspects you feel we didn't cover so far?
Well, I would ask the question, and the audience can participate in this too, but to everyone, it's like, what do we could wave a magic wand and say this is what Michigan looks like and success looks like 20, 30 years from now. Like, what are a couple of key things that we would want to see for Michigan?
I can go first. I did my most recent degree. My wife is swearing it's my last from Michigan. So when my class graduated, I was the oldest member, I think, in our class. Most of them were, in their mid to late 20s. About 95, 96%, they just gone to the coast, right? And I get it. It's kind of like a scratch. I think we all need to. It's an itch that we all need to scratch, but finding ways to kind of bring them back at some point, or decreasing that percentage that goes to the coast immediately, right? So we were just discussing before we began the panel. We have all these fantastic, highly educated folks coming out of our wonderful universities, but we, oftentimes PhDs, postdocs, they don't have a home here. They leave because they don't have a way to kind of potentially live in the country. So if we can find a way to keep them in Michigan, right? They can either work for companies and bring value, or they can do their own startups, right? So it'll kind of keep moving forward. So these are maybe larger policy kinds of issues, but I think, in an ideal world, I'd love for all the work that goes into kind of attracting them here in the first place to our universities and, subsidizing them in various ways. But once they graduate, let's kind of keep our, either, folks who've come from outside or native born here so that they can add to Michigan's success story.
Prem, Grand Valley is actually really good at doing that. And I don't think it gets enough credit. It's something, I haven't heard the data recently, but something like 90% of their graduates do stay in the region in Michigan, so that's credit to them. My magic wand, Trista, would be to address my skepticism that the political and the infrastructural and the societal systems can keep up with the growth in technology. So if I could fix those, then I think we would avoid the problems that these cities that have this, influx of capital and talent and startups suffer from. Because the venture-backed model and the people moving fast and breaking things and changing the world and innovating, they're going to go way faster than the political system. They're going to go way faster than people's attitudes, or the laws, or the unions, or the incumbent companies, or whatever it is. So you end up with systems in the places we live that don't work so well. That would be the piece I'd fix. Make them move faster, or allow them to move faster.
If you want your young people to stay here, to your point, don't stop talking about Michigan negatively. If we could, that would be my magic wand, is if we could all do that. Stop talking negatively. I know it's spring now, so now we're super positive about Michigan, but especially in the winter. We are our own worst enemies sometimes when it comes to talent attraction, when it comes to retention. Right, what would it be like if someone said, graduated from one of our universities and says, I want to stay here. I'm fighting for a position to stay here in Michigan. What would that look like? That would be absolutely incredible. And I know we have some, but what could that look like if it was the majority? And I know a lot of our organizations, even around the state, are working on programs for students to help make that happen. We have one here in West Michigan. Detroit has one. Lansing does an amazing job at that in the summer. But just speak positively about the community. It is springtime, it is summertime, we're coming to tourist season. When was the last time you invited someone from outside the area to come vacation here? To come explore it, to come experience our communities when, a lot, traditionally, we're kind of at our best, right, in the spring, and the summer. As a summer challenge, that's one thing I challenge everyone in this room to do, is to invite someone here to experience Michigan so that they can see it for themselves. Someone who has no idea, they just see crappy things on the news, they just see our weather reports, when we have snowstorms, but invite them to see what it's like. That would be my magic wand, is if the community could, all of us collectively, could speak positively, and we could bring more people in that way.
Trista, did you have one?
There's so many things. I would like everyone in Michigan to earn a living wage. I would like us to, something Carl mentioned in terms of, policymakers, as we know, never move as quickly as innovation. So I'd love to see some of the innovators and people in the innovation economy take a more active role in our politics, and be that advocate and help them do some of that work, because that's how we're going to get things to move a little faster. I would also, we have so many natural resources in Michigan. I think, what's unique about Michigan, we have 90-some thousand square miles of land and 1,000 cubic miles of fresh water, and that is actually breeding ground for more innovation, right? How can we use that? How can we further advance agricultural technology here, which could definitely be a game changer for Michigan and a place that we can stand out amongst the crowd. There's all of these indexes now about when climate change really, really hits the fan, where do you want to live? And Michigan's always in the top 10, top 5, right? So let's lean into that, right? Let's focus on sustainability. I would love for Michigan to be recognized as a place that has the most companies with a chief sustainability officer. I want to see more autonomous transit ways, and going back to public transportation. We have to make our cities walkable, because that is another way that you attract culture and you attract creativity and innovators. I'm long on Michigan. You know, I came back here. I'm committed to being here. But we've got some work to do. So I just want to, you know, put that out there as a call for anyone who wants to get involved in these kinds of things. Like, we're always talking about this and looking at this kind of stuff at Michigan Founders Fund. So please feel free to reach out if you are interested in, you know, championing some of this work.
Excellent. Well, on that note, let's open it up to questions. Yeah, we got a question in back there.
I'll stand up because I'm very bold. Carl, so I just have a quick comment, but I do have a question. So you talked about the skepticism of politics and things like that, but I think what we have to recognize here is that our big business people, our big billionaires that created these private businesses actually sometimes support policies and things that actually create barriers for underserved communities. So we need those private businesses to understand the trickle effect that they've actually created and being able to unplug those seeds. So let's just be very, very front and just forward and bold about that. Because I'm an entrepreneur, I'm the person that's bringing esports and gaming in here, and I work in the trenches, I'm in the hood every day. I understand what those people need. And so I definitely appreciate you recognizing and acknowledging that. But I want to know what gets you guys up every day to be venture capitalists, and what type of companies, and when you guys and people usually look at investments, they look at people, they look at their character. So what do you guys look at when you're investing into someone? Because usually you invest into a person, you look at their character.
Good question.
So we invest mostly in early stage companies, right? It is really, there is no product market fit. There is pretty much every risk level you look at is high. So what drives us to then make a decision to say, let's back this company? It's really the vision and the passion of the founders, right? Who have they, kind of surrounded themselves with? How coachable is that person? They don't need to kind of have all the answers, right? But when we kind of make that first check and we usually tranche our investments, and are they able to make progress against the small milestones early on? We take a coaching approach to working with the entrepreneurs. For me personally, what makes me get up in the morning is I'm not as smart as these entrepreneurs. I really feed off their energy, and kind of every day is like working with a new company. You learn something new, right? That's very exciting. Instead of like a desk job where you're doing the same thing day in, day out. This way, I get to work with some of the biggest and brightest ideas, and help in some way contribute to the potential of those ideas.
I think part of the answer to this question is thinking about the whole system and the stats around this. So a venture capitalist will become aware of 1,000 companies in some fashion. They might look, get a pitch deck or look closely at 100, and I'm talking about like per year. They might look closely at 100, and then like do a deep dive on 10, research the industry, do reference calls with customers, that kind of stuff, to winnow down and make 2 investments. So if you think about just like jumping in that pool of 1,000 companies, 1,000 founders, 2 of you are going to get funded. This is long odds. This is like another reason, having been a venture capitalist and having learned these things and finding out that I'm like much more comfortable on the founder side of the table than the VC side of the table, that makes me think like there are other ways we should be bringing money to the table for other kinds of companies that will never get venture capital. Not because they're not deserving and they couldn't make a really great business, but because VC-funded companies have to have extremely high growth rates. They have to be very, very scalable and do it quickly. And that's just not every business is like that. But they can be excellent businesses for our community. And this gets into this equity question. Like my personal answer to your question of what do we look for is I'm currently interested in finding Black founders and getting more companies going in Grand Rapids that are Black-led, Black-founded. And I think when I step back and ask myself, how do you go about making that happen? It gets into your point about the power and where it is and where it's been and the money. And the fact that this is still a very segregated city. We are still living that history that we've had for decades, if not hundreds of years. And so we got to break that down. We got to start desegregating and integrating our city so that there are relationships, so I know when I'm looking to invest who the Black founders are because I happen to know them already, or they know me already. I think that's what we can all do individually, is look for ways to integrate our personal and our professional networks.
Anyone else? Yeah, in the back.
Two parts. First, when you're talking about the tightness of job market coming up, digital nomads can go either way, right? It doesn't mean they're going to come to you because of where you're founded. And does that cut into tightening the labor shortage? And for all sort of VC and founding companies, does the growth of AI, like when you see the layoffs in the Valley, is that affecting how the founder world is maybe changing a little bit and how it's going to grow in the future?
I'll take a little bit on the talent one there. You know, talent it's really interesting. Certainly, I mean, what I do in my industry has really, it's been like the Wild West since the pandemic started and the rise of remote work. You know, in some ways, you know, at the very beginning of remote work, companies, my recruiters, my members, they were really excited because they were like, all right, we could get people to be a part of our talent pool that don't want to relocate to West Michigan. Maybe they don't want to do winter, they don't have a reason to come here. And I kind of, like, I was very skeptical when they said it because I was like, all right, the other shoe's going to drop here and like, just wait for it. And really what that was is there's people here that are, you know, rooted here in West Michigan that they could go work, they could stay in the community but go work somewhere else, right? So they were leaving our local talent pool. And, you know, Michigan, because of our affordability around cost of living, that means that sometimes our wages do not, right, like they don't always compete with other higher area metros. And so the remote part is actually, that can be really detrimental to West Michigan. I think there's a lot, like, we're equalizing a lot, and I think now a lot more companies, if they are remote, on a permanent remote status, they're adjusting their pay structures, so it's not so inequitable in terms of, okay, like, our company is here in Silicon Valley, but you don't have to live here, but we're paying you Silicon Valley wages, right? Like, I think there's more companies that are looking at their pay policies there. Remote work, that's hard for regions like West Michigan, and because of our pay. So in terms of, you know, also with the economy, yes, there's layoffs, but there's not enough to fix what we have going on here, right? Like, that's a piece, and maybe it's helped fix like a little piece, but there's so many different undercurrents and things happening in different microcosms within the labor market that, like, some layoffs in Silicon Valley, while that really stinks for those companies and for those workers, and it was a pretty large scale, that isn't necessarily trickling to West Michigan. It's certainly not going to fix West Michigan's labor issues.
Anyone else?
Yep.
I think it's been really refreshing to listen to you guys talk, and, you know, like, Carl, your ideas on like what we should do with the city in terms of investing in tech. Because I think what can happen is when we over-optimize for capital, if we just need more capital, if we just had more capital, it would be so much easier, is we want to get to Austin, we just got to go southeast, right? We just keep going southeast, we get to Austin, and then we keep going, now we're out of the solar system, right? Like, and that's what happens when you over-optimize for a simple solution. And hearing that that's not like what this panel has really delivered today. What I keep hearing you guys talk about is, like, you're revolving around the word that in my mind is, we need a better market in Michigan. Like, you need to have access to revenue, you need to have access to talent, you need to have access to capital. How do we make a better market, both at the state level, maybe the general region of the Great Lakes, and then West Michigan? What do you guys see as missing in our market, or something that, like, is a pillar that we don't necessarily have, that could be improved to just generally create a stronger market, which would make it easier for us to develop a tech hub, which would make it easier for us to have affordable housing, which would yada, 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 yada. Is there any ideas in your mind on that kind of 10,000-foot view?
I can jump in on this one first. So I'll go back to culture. I always talk about this, but we've got to shift that narrative around risk-taking, but also in terms of the cultural piece to create that market. The problem is when you look at other tech hubs and why they thrive, it's density is a key part of that. Like you have to have, and I'm talking about geographic density even. So the fact that Michigan, all of the different innovators are so geographically dispersed, like I'm here in Grand Rapids today, I drove 2 hours to get here this morning, I spend most of my time in Ann Arbor, and because we're kind of infighting in terms of marketing ourselves in Michigan, it's Detroit versus Grand Rapids versus Ann Arbor, we're doing ourselves a disservice really outside the state because no one outside the state really cares about those nuances. So I think that's a piece of the puzzle, right, is like how do we come together and create a more strategic economic development plan for the state and create more density amongst the different centers of tech and centers of talent here. And then the other piece is actually regulatory. So there's 5 trades that like Upwork or Up Global did this great research report years ago that I still reference because I think it's so spot on. And they were purchased by Techstars, it's a research group, but where there's 5 traits to a thriving startup ecosystem. So density is one, culture is one, the regulatory environment is one, capital and talent. We over-index on talent in terms of the research institutions, the R&D spend here, the number of institutions. We are doing, again, like work to do on the culture front, but we're recognizing this, and a lot of people are starting to get in line around this bigger vision that we want to have here. And even look at what Grand Rapids is doing in terms of putting that stake in the ground and creating this 10-year plan to be a tech hub, right? So again, just going back to innovation. Density, that's a problem. Like we've got to like stop the infighting, figure out how to create a more strategic cohesion across our regions. But the regulatory environment is a big one for us that is like preventing us from having that kind of market environment that breeds innovation in a healthy way, I would say. And there's lots of reasons for that, but we need to make Michigan truly fertile ground for innovation. We need state level dedication to innovation as a pillar of our economic development strategy, which today it's not really when you kind of dig under the covers, right, and see where money's being allocated. But we also need new policies in place. We need more tax incentives for this kind of business, for angel investing. We need more funds going into funds of funds and to like evergreen opportunities to solve that first check issue. So I think the regulatory pieces is a big opportunity for us in terms of shifting our priorities, but also shifting like the path that we're taking and where Michigan could go in the future.
So I think while fully recognizing Carl's point about venture capital and high-tech, high-growth startups are not the panacea for our society's ills, what Michigan has not had is kind of large exits. Right? In the communities like in California and New York, you have like these what's called spillover ethics, right? When a company IPOs, right, it creates a lot of wealth for its employees, and there's this inbuilt knowledge that they have of having worked in those companies. So we've had a few, right, in the last 5 years, 5-6 years, but not enough of those. We don't have a critical mass of that yet. So when those companies, get acquired or IPO, then folks come out and they start their own companies, right? And then it kind of has like this cascading effect on the ecosystem, right? So I think we're still kind of in the early stages of hitting that critical mass. We've invested in, I think at this point, 2 companies that have come out of, that were started by founders who were employees, one of the earliest employees in Duo Security, for example, and one in StockX, right? So once we have more of these stories, right? So I think it can kind of create, go a long way towards that critical mass that can address some of the things that we mentioned.
One of Atomic's 6 values is think long term. And when I apply that to this circumstance, you can see this in Right Places Tech Hub initiative. That's a 10-year goal. That's not like by next year we're going to do it. I also want to point out that their goal, I believe, was 10% the workforce and technology, which would bring us up to, or just a tiny bit above, the national average. So this is not some kind of crazy thing they're talking about. It's important to remember. But when I think about like even longer term, I'm more at least interested in growing and taking advantage of the human capital we already have and the infrastructure we already have by using it better. And so that requires that we have perhaps new offers for people to learn technology skills that sit somewhere between a boot camp, a very brief experience, and the golden ticket of a university degree. Something that's more accessible financially, that doesn't have the barriers to entry that university does, but serves you better than just a boot camp experience. I think something in the middle there would be valuable. And then to make it accessible to the communities that are not represented in technology now. That's an untapped resource. So fixing, you know, like, so if I could fix another magic wand thing for Trista, if I could fix that one thing that would make it more likely that we are able to use everybody in town, then I think we need to fix GRPS. We need better outcomes from the public school system.
And I'll just add on Trista's point about coming together as a state. I think we do have a long history of, you know, kind of Grand Rapids versus Ann Arbor, Detroit versus everybody, right? It's always a play for dollars, and that's just a reality. One thing I think that we've done better, at least I can speak from the talent space, is we've done a much better job as coming together as the communities in Michigan. Understanding that we have very diverse communities in terms of what our communities offer, but when someone is looking, if they don't have a connection to Michigan, the first thing that's going to spark for them is not going to be the difference between Houghton and Traverse City. There's like no concept of that yet. But if they can grasp onto this idea of Michigan as a cool place, then that's where we need to start. And so I think we've been, you know, thinking about where we improve in the marketplace, and from the talent realm at least, there's been a huge leap forward since COVID in all the talent players working together. I lead a group called Back to Michigan, which is basically all of the Hello West Michigans of all the different regions. And now we're working together and we're trying to help each other, because the reality is yes, West Michigan's talent attraction game can be strong, but we need Marquette's and Houghton's and Flint's and Bay Cities to be just as strong. So if the brand of Michigan is catching people and bringing people into that funnel, that our cities and our municipalities are well equipped to say, okay, you want to move to my city? Like, this is how we can help you make that happen. And so that's one piece, I think, in terms of the marketplace and that collaboration that we have moved forward and we're continuing to move forward.
We have time for one more. Yeah.
So this might build a little bit on the last question and go back to a panel, Prem, that you were on with Zach Booker a couple of months ago, Founders Event, and the statement you made about exits. Right? I have a hypothesis, and so I'd like the panel to react to this. The question in that prior panel was, what's going to actually get us to the transformation that all of us want here in West Michigan? And the idea of a big $1 billion plus exit was posed. My hypothesis is that we don't do enough right now to help our high potentials get to that exit. And I think Zach is maybe the best example that we have here, ADHD Online. And so back to you, the panel, are we doing enough? And what more could we do to make sure that we get the high potential entrepreneurs to the exit that can drive that eco effect?
I think I can speak on the experience with ADHD Online. So, Red Cedar Ventures and Michigan Rise are wholly owned subsidiaries of MSU Research Foundation, and the foundation works with about 7 health systems across the state. And so we are connecting Zach's company with those health systems to kind of build their kind of pipeline, right? We work with organizations that are advocates for entrepreneurs, like Endeavor Network, for example, that is assisting Zach at policy level in Washington, D.C., for example. So I think tapping into our networks, larger networks, to kind of assist our portfolio, at least from our perspective, our portfolio companies to hit that next level of stride, right? To attract capital. So the foundation is an LP in several funds across the country, and fund of funds. So introductions to those funds to kind of help with their downstream fundraising. So those are some of the ways I think, at least from our perspective, we're looking to assist with companies like ADHD.
Anyone else? Sure, go ahead.
So really briefly for the panel, I'm curious to get some insight into what your portfolio allocation strategy is, especially considering a lot of these companies come from all over the place and are aligned to varying industries. How is the funding being distributed from an allocation perspective within your various portfolios?
I want to monopolize the time here. Carly, why not start?
Well, I think you're touching on the reason that Prem is makes 62 investments is at that stage you have to make a lot of investments, just to break even. And so it's a really hard space for individual angels to participate, or any person who wants to be a limited partner, if the person's providing the money to the venture capital firm, because you have to place so many bets in order to just have any hope of even getting your money back. That big surprise, angels and LPs aren't rushing into the space, which is why you have state money to do this. And I think the MEDC has a role to play, could be playing a greater role here. And as far as do you have the breakdown in your 62? That would be interesting.
Yeah, so a third is software companies, a third is life sciences, and a third is rest. But we are being intentional of diversifying that more. Like there's not really a whole lot of innovation happening in ag tech, for example. Like we seek those out, right? Maybe we would support them with a check even earlier than what we would, because we want to literally seed those ideas into companies coming out. So diversifying not just, I think, in the human resources side, but also I think in the ideas and technologies that we're backing is one of our strategies.
Historically, Michigan Capital Network, which is the group of companies that Grand Angels, or the group of organizations Grand Angels started. So it's Grand Angels and Kalamazoo Angels and Woodward Angels and maybe Flint Angels, though I think they're sort of tentative right now. And then lastly, Blue Water Angels, which had been existing for a long time and then became part of MCN. MCN historically has invested in B2B software, life sciences, advanced technology, and advanced ag.
I think, just the nature of venture capital funds, they start with a thesis and they have a specific focus of, how they want to invest that capital, and they only have so much per fund, and they always reserve for follow-on too, right? So I think this also speaks to the bigger problem of, in Prem's case, because they have state money and he's making a lot of those early bets, there's more capital to spread out, but even knowing that, like he said, it's a third. So it's more the fact that we don't have enough venture capital funds here, because we need more of them to actually have enough investors that are taking a look at all of the different verticals where we could have investments, or where we could see entrepreneurs building here in the state.
Yeah, VC funds with unique theses, right? If they're all VC funds doing software, you're only going to have software companies here, right? So, but is there a VC fund for CPG? Is there a VC fund for space tech? UP is kind of like this burgeoning kind of lab for space tech, right? So, my kind of comment I made earlier, we are seeking those out and kind of collaborating with those entrepreneurs even earlier than what we normally would, to kind of make sure that they have the ammunition needed to get to that next level.
All right, excellent. Quick question?
Yeah, I'm just curious about nonprofits and whether there's ever a place of such a thing as investing in nonprofits, or is that kind of self-contradictory idea?
Well, so my organization is a nonprofit. We're a 501c3, and the pledges that founders are making into a collective social impact fund that we hold at the nonprofit, we actually do use for grant making back into the community to other nonprofit organizations. So that's our focus. but that's different. That's just an entirely different kind of model than like venture capital. It's driven by returns on the investment, right? Like, so I think what you're talking about is more impact investing, which is still typically a for-profit company that has a specific mandate or like social responsibility, ESG, just kind of baked into the business model itself, but still a for-profit business.
It's called an L3C to be exact. It's an L3C, a social impact company.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Harvard Business Review this month, Jasmine, has an article on making that decision for profit versus nonprofit. And it talks about how much more gray that is now. Because for mission-aligned companies, they could go one way or the other, and it lays out a framework for how to make a good decision. I thought it was quite interesting. But you know, that Fifth Star Fund that I was describing, that venture philanthropy, is an interesting hybrid as well. Like me putting money into it, I don't look like an investor, I look like I'm making a charitable donation, but to a founder who's getting funding from it, it looks like a venture capitalist. But because it's a nonprofit, they put all of their carried interest, all the returns that the fund gets on those investments, back into other investments. It should, in the long run, become evergreen. So it's constantly circulating money into the founder community.
And there's different structures. Each state actually recognizes different kinds of corporate structures, like public benefit company, which is basically that kind of legal entity was created to be that hybrid of a for-profit, nonprofit business for those who have a very purpose-driven and centric mission towards, you know, revenue. So it's something, if that's something you're interested in exploring, it kind of differs by state. You might want to look into that.
And it's also, I guess, you know, the type of investor. Like, you know, we have a hybrid thesis, for example. It's not purely returns driven. It is a blend of economic development and returns, right? So we are set up to be an evergreen fund. So the returns, like Carl's comment, that will come to us will go out. We've had one exit in our 3 years, and so that was deployed back into the community. And you know, for nonprofits, like I know several foundations only invest in nonprofits, right? They will not kind of back, you know, for-profit companies. So that could be a source of capital for various you know, grants and so forth.
Excellent. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time here, but that's a good segue to mention there's a brown bag lunch downstairs, right? Downstairs, where we can carry on some of these conversations. Thank you all so much for being here for this panel. I think it's been great, and special thanks to our panelists as well for all your insight and experiences. So have a great day. Thank you.